Okay. So this is the next session. We are getting started for the next session, and we get all the curators from 4 film festivals together here, talking about VR in film festivals. And I'll follow the calendar of the year from here to Shari in Sundance Film Festival in January, and then Blake from South by Southwest in March. Ingrid from Tribeca in April, and Michelle, I think it's late August, early.
End of August.
Yeah, so, welcome. And I see Shari and Michelle was here last year, and I'm glad to know Blake and Ingrid is the first time in China and first time in Qingdao. So for today, I think while we're in the festival, we can talk about festival itself and have some reflection on what we have done in film festivals, and what our inputs in film festival while we're sitting here. Because the topic is about Incubate, and I'm thinking that we can start from our own festival experience. Like, because I believe last year you have touched about that. Like, what's the first edition, and where we have been now, and how the trajectory goes from the first and the latest, and a little bit contraction about this too. What about we start from Shari?
Well, so the first edition of New Frontier, you mean? Or
yeah, the VR connected.
Oh, the
session.
VR connection, yeah. Okay, well, the incubation is really kind of coming from, at Sundance, a place of experimentation. It was an experiment, New Frontier, it was an experiment that started in 2007 that was trying to bring artists from different disciplines, filmmaking, fine art, journalism, and technology, creative technologists, coming together at a film festival specifically. VR kind of launched out of New Frontier when, kind of arrived there through Nani de la Peña in 2012, after 2011 studio visit. And, there was a lot of excitement, if we're focusing on VR, there was a lot of excitement about the medium. It's blown up tremendously. I mean, this is amazing what the show that is here is really kind of some of the best of VR works, and really kind of XR works that have been showing at all of our festivals throughout the year. It's really kind of a tremendous a show. At Sundance, the last year, I'd say,
by last year is 2019 or 18?
19, that's
okay.
right, 2019. The 2019 festival, there was definitely VR in the show. Maybe it's starting to look different. Kind of reaching, I think, see that artists are reaching for how VR brings people together, integrating it in immersive theater, socializing, kind of reaching for a moment where it is a platform for computing and socialization rather than one-off experiences. But then it's also, we had 3 Magic Leap projects as well. And there's also, a kind of comment. It's getting to a place now where artists are starting to comment on the phenomenon, the technology phenomenon. For instance, I found a shadow play artist, Christine Marie, and we put her in a theater in the Egyptian, which is like our trademark, old-fashioned theater. This piece was called Antiquated Augmented Reality, which was. There was absolutely nothing digital about it at all. But it was shadow play with dancers. And you wore blue and red glasses to be immersed in the shadows of these live dancers. And it was all just light. It was not digital. So, it's interesting to see the economy of these ideas start to play out that engage the technology in conceptual ways. That's what I'm starting to see at Sundance.
Really, thank you. And Blake, what about because just we chatted about the first is 2008 2016.
16
right?
officially for kind of bringing all of the immersive content together. But South by is a unique environment where we're not just a film festival, but we're also a music festival and a technology conference with touching points in like everywhere in between. So we've been having content related to virtual reality for a long time, starting, in the tech conference really is where it kind of birthed out of. Palmer Luckey was there really early on with some of the early Oculus, content to talk about it and to kind of show where it's going. I remember hearing about Felix and Paul, meeting with an agent who took them to see Palmer Luckey in a tiny little bar during South by Southwest, where discussions started to begin that actually formed the studio for Felix and Paul back, and that was probably like 2013, 2014 in the earlier days. And then we decided in 2016 that there's enough of this content that's very captivating and everybody is really interested in it that we would give it its own section in our conference, and we started our VR AR track in 2016. Alongside that, we had kind of some trade show components next to it, and then we also had this small little room where we were able to kind of start showcasing actual content created by the creatives and actually focus on that. And it was really small, but it was so successful, and everybody from all of the different parts of South by Southwest, all of our different audiences were so interested in it that we were able to kind of expand that and build that out into our virtual cinema that started in 2017, which is our official immersive showcase that runs alongside the conference element as well. And that has doubled in size pretty much every year as we've gone along, because it's been, everybody has been so captivated by the interesting content that's being created in these different types of VR and AR and MR type experiences.
And how many works are there, selections for this year?
So for 2019, we had 25 official full-length selections. We had one kind of section of demos where we had 7 demos. Those people kind of got to pitch in the conference and then showcase and have meetings with kind of demos of the projects as well.
Great. And Ingrid?
So I actually started curating for the Tribeca Film Festival in 2013, but it came out of the work that I was doing working at the Tribeca Film Institute, which is the non-profit sister organization to the Tribeca Film Festival. And there I was running the interactive department, where I was funding a lot of interactive work, not VR at the time. I started doing that in 2011. So I was funding mostly kind of interactive documentaries, web documentaries and apps. And sort of experiments in storytelling beyond the screen. And I got really interested. I'd been going to New Frontier actually since 2007 and was always really excited by the work that Shari was showing there, and also at IDFA Doc Lab. And I thought we need more spaces to show this work. So Tribeca was really excited by that as well. And we started showing work. In 2013, we had no VR, and it was completely free to enter. We only had about, I can't remember exactly, but about 6 or 7 projects. And we had free gin to lure people in. So it was very, very different to how it is now. And it was a little bit out the way of the rest of the festival. But people found it, and people really loved it. And then in 2012, I saw my first VR project, which was Noni de la Peña's Hunger in LA at Sundance. And, and I think after that, everything changed. So by 2014, we were showing VR, and we've been showing VR every year since then. And now, at the time then, it was just Tribeca Storyscapes, which was an in-competition section. Now, Storyscapes has kind of emerged in a bigger program called Tribeca Immersive, which my colleague Lauren Hammonds curates with me. And so Storyscapes is still the in-competition section, and it's normally only around 5 projects, VR and other kinds of immersive media. And then the rest of Immersive is about 20 other projects, mostly room scale, and then we also have a 360 cinema. And it's changed vastly. We moved venues, and there are way more people, and we do charge for tickets now, and there's no more free gin.
Wonderful. And we know that Venice just, I think, closed submission for almost 1 month already, and I think you must be very busy and going over all the projects. So because it's only 2 years, but these 2 years are fundamental 2 years for VR and the whole industry. So I would like to hear your share that.
Yes, Liz Rosenthal and I are in the middle of selecting the projects. We will lock our selection next week. I think compared to what the work that Sherry, Blake and Ingrid are doing, that what is specific about Venice is that the Venice Biennale International Film Festival is the oldest film festival in the world. And it is quite remarkable that the Biennale as an organization has been so supportive of embracing change by including virtual reality into the actual competition of the official festival. And I believe we're the only festival where VR is treated and embraced exactly on the same level as the feature film main competition. So this is what makes us, I think, specific. Liz and I are working hard at doing two things, aside from selecting what we think are the most interesting works. One is to really build a bridge between the film world, the traditional film world, trying to reflect the works of film directors who are interested in exploring this new form. And the second thing is to try and use the glamour of the platform that a festival like Venice offers for VR to be elevated in the way people perceive VR. And a lot of people in the media industry still think that VR is a little thing on the side. Nothing to be taken seriously yet on an artistic and creative level. So we are trying to work at showing that no, VR is a new art form. It's a full-fledged artistic language, and as such, it should be honored and treated exactly the same way. So this is why in Venice we have an international jury giving awards that are given at the same ceremony as the feature films, and the actual objects that the awarded films get is the same lion that the feature films get. And we think it's extremely important to give that shining light to VR as a new art form, to show the world that incredibly interesting artists are exploring the form, are inventing, and are making this probably one of the most exciting creative challenges of our time right now. So, and then the other thing I'd like to say is that I think when you're a festival like we are at Venice VR, you're hosting something for the creators and for the public that is similar to the thing you do when you're hosting a dinner at your place. You try and cook as well as you can, and and bring the best ingredients and have the best possible party. But what makes the party is the people who come, and this is something you don't own, this is something you can facilitate. And we believe very much that Venice VR should be more and more a meeting ground, and an informal one, where people come because the work is worth watching, but it's also, they come because they want to meet each other. And we want to leave that free and quite open. So we are lucky to have an island right off the Lido, which is now known as VR Island, and it's a very old island, abandoned island, that we occupy during the 10 days of Venice VR. So this is what I think makes us specific.
And also follow you mentioned about the island. Is it in plan will bring a bridge, or you keep
No. There can't be any bridges connecting the island, even though VR Island is only like 50 meters away from the Lido. The space between is the main channel for sailboats, and if we built a bridge, it would have to be 30 meters high and only 50 meters long. So it would be a bridge like this. So it will never be a bridge. We have a shuttle boat.
Boats are part of the charm of Venice.
Yes, because that also connects to my next question about the venue, because we do have put really theory thoughts on the choice of the venue to put where VR happens. And how, I just curious, how did you get that island?
It's the president of the Biennale that had an eye on this island for actually years. And when we came with Liz with our ambition, you know, to make this a very big event where we needed a lot of place, he saw the opportunity to use the Venice VR as the pretext, the perfect pretext to use this island. And this island had been abandoned for about 130 years, and we occupied it, you know, in 2 weeks. We changed it so that it could house the Venice VR section.
And it's a good way, actually, to where VR can happen at a kind of isolated place, although it's very close to another larger island and then to the continent, but it's like another layer of the reality could happen there. And about Spring Studio, do you want to spring, because we call arcade, that's a different notion about how we could create an atmosphere of where VR happens in Tribeca. So
yeah. Well, we wish we could get an island in New York, but it's a little bit tough. I would love to have an island, but real estate in New York is tough for everyone. But yeah, we moved into, I think in 2015, we moved to Spring Studios, which is actually the festival hub. So it's where you do your festival registration. We have all our panels. We have some screenings there, some big events in the main festival lounges. So it's nice in the sense that it is the space that everyone who attends the festival comes through, which means that people will be discovering the VR who might not necessarily be seeking it out. That's the good side. I think the challenging thing for us is all the VR is in one room, apart from the VR cinema. And increasingly, we are finding that to be challenging because the pieces are getting bigger. And increasingly, there are mocapped actors, and there are moving floors. Everyone really has moving floors now. And often they just need a huge footprint. We're increasingly also getting multiplayer, multi-audience experiences. So for pieces like that, like we had Jack and Hero last year, it is really challenging putting all those pieces in one space. And I think another thing that I'm finding is that, you know, some VR pieces are, like films, really different from each other. And the experience for the audience going into a fun piece like Jack, or maybe a more contemplative piece like The Collider, is very different. And the way that you come out of those experiences is very different. And so I think more and more that sort of feeling of coming out of a piece and then suddenly being on this floor of an arcade is not always the best audience experience. So this year for the first time we had a piece, it wasn't actually a VR piece, but we had a piece on Canal Street. There's an organization called Wallplay who have mostly kind of just a vacant storefront property that they put arts into. And Lance Weiler, who's been in the space for many, many years, did a piece called Where There's Smoke There. And that was really great because he had his own space. You know, people could kind of be in that space for that project. And when they left that, I mean, they were on Canal Street, so it wasn't exactly chill. But I think that is something that I would really like to do more of, is actually have some pieces on the arcade. I think some pieces work really well on in that kind of environment. And obviously, it's lovely to have a space where everyone can be together. And I think for some pieces that works very well, but I do think increasingly we are going to need to find other spaces where work can just exist on its own. And where it can be loud and the floors can move and it's not going to interfere with the other pieces around that. Because I think both for the artists and for the artist's experience of their work being shown and then also for the audience experience, I don't think we're always doing the best job. And it's just something, I mean, that's just something I think about all the time, obviously, because I want it to be an amazing experience for the artists and for the audiences. It's both, it's just very important to me.
And I remember Blake mentioned actually the VR section have a very close connection to interactive track. So how that happens too?
Yeah, so South by Southwest we're kind of take over all of the downtown area, and so at times we're just fighting for whatever inch of space we can find within the footprint of South by Southwest. But that interactive tracks were hosted in these hotels kind of around, and then included in our convention center, connected to that. So we started off kind of connected to that hub area, right next to the kind of heart of South by in the convention center. And then in our in 2018, we were lucky enough to kind of move over towards our own little hub in another hotel down the street. But it created we created a really great community kind of space for that was not only the VR and immersive community, but also combined with, we had our intelligent future track in there, so some of our tech tracks that really were able to help kind of meld different audiences and expose kind of different work to people who had similar interests that were congruent to the immersive technology, which has been really fun and interesting to kind of introduce our immersive crowd, because a lot of us, we travel together and we go see all of our friends at all of our immersive events, but then to be able to kind of bring in some tangential technologists and people who are interested in similar type of things, kind of bring them into the same rooms has been really interesting. It's been very fun.
And I still remember the gloomy eyes in South by Southwest, and compared with that was how it's located in Sundance. And I think I remember last year we were in the tent for Sandbox, and you also mentioned something uncontrollable about having a tent outside, and we're trying to create something outside the theater for VR at the very beginning. And you also mentioned we do have something come back to the theater for the last edition. So how do you what's your feel about that? Or
Well, tents are no match for the weather, that's for sure. Never do anything in a tent. It's one of those growing pains, 2017. Fortunately, trying to get Al Gore, Pharrell into a tent really kind of opened the eyes up, I think, for the Institute to really kind of double down and find a bigger, more permanent venue. So that, after that, we opened up the Ray. It was a 400-seat theater, and in the basement is a permanent home for New Frontier. And that was in 2018. And then last year, in addition to that, we opened a new venue that used to be a Blockbuster, ironically. And now it's just a gutted kind of space that we take over, and we have that for the next 4 years. And it came right in time because, as Ingrid mentioned, these pieces are getting bigger. And it's also very important to keep, at least what I've been seeing too, is that people are entering the frame of the experience, of the digital experience, the human, the corpus. So we needed that space to house this work, and also to tag along with the social aspect of the work. Particularly when we were building a showcase for MR, for the Magic Leap Works. And I'll cite specifically the Royal Shakespeare Company, their collaboration with Magic Leap. When I saw the work in LeapCon and at Magic Leap, it was always inside of a black box. But working with, and this is part of the incubation part of it as well, like working with the RSC, and what they were trying to reach for, it was kind of obvious, is putting the Shakespeare back in the round. So we needed a large space. We needed a space where we could create something for that piece that put it inside of the social space, as opposed to a distinct box. Together we built an amphitheater in the middle of the space so that you could actually see experience. 7 Ages of Man is the work, while all of the other works were happening around you, people were talking, and then you were also seeing Robert Gilbert deliver 7 Ages of Man. And that's essentially, that gets essentially to the core of what that medium is, and also what the work is, what Shakespeare was doing at the time, but using the technology to expand and lean back into the purest spirit of that work.
I also have the feeling that the new venue for this year, all the works have some live action performance inputs. What's your intention to create? Like you have, because every piece in that new venue has actor or actress.
Yeah, I don't know if it was an intention. Actually, it was just something that came across the desk. I always follow the artists. And what I find compelling, maybe, I did find it compelling, still do, that people are coming into the frame of the work. I think, these mediums are about expression, communication, cultural enhancing what we are and celebrating what we are as human beings. And so I find it a very encouraging thing that this is happening.
Yeah, and it's also a very important part of a film festival to be, and it's like Sandbox have institute, as an incubator to help new people who are who come into the new area and try to find their own story and put their own gene in this new storytelling way. So I would like to ask you to share about how as a film festival organizer and in the VR track, how you input in the incubator as an incubator or bring new people into this new area.
Well, we do have a lab, so it's New Frontier Film Festival is in the Film Festival, and New Frontier Story Lab and residencies. This is a program where we select 6 fellows. Actually, one was, this year we had the first Chinese fellow.
Do you want to share how many submissions you have?
For the lab?
Yeah, lab.
Oh, gosh.
Out of how ballpark?
I don't actually know about the lab. The lab is probably something around 200 to 300. But we switch, we make 6 selections. And the residencies it's not a submission based. It's something that we will solicit specific artists, sometimes out of the lab, oftentimes applications that came through that we were interested in, that's better suited for a residency rather than the lab. And certainly once it's not a guarantee once you go through the lab that you'll go to the festival, but when that lines up the timing, because we love when our fellows go to South by Southwest and Tribeca and Venice. But when they come through the festival, the incubation, at least at our turf, I continue to work with the artists to sometimes R&D the work at the festival, or sometimes expand and help work with them to spatialize the work in a very specific way. Because we have, up until now, we've had very challenging spaces, and we also, and it's made us very creative in how to present the work. And so that's a part of the kind of incubation of new forms, working with artists to, like that RC example, to figure out new ways of presenting the work.
For us, I feel like our biggest goal is always to beef and build our community. So one thing that we have access to as film festivals are these submissions, and that we're able to come through and find new creators who their work may have never been seen before. It might be their first piece, and really to take those, bring them into this larger community and put them next to a more established creator or someone who has been working together, so that they can help mentor each other and kind of help beef the community up and grow the community as a whole. That's one of, I think, my favorite things about the film festivals and how they've been helping the VR community and the immersive community is by finding and bringing in this new talent, and then really kind of building mentorships between them and existing talent to kind of beef up everybody and kind of, bringing people in from around the world to the United States or to Europe or to China here, Sandbox, and kind of helping these communities kind of bolster all over and kind of form together to one larger community.
Well, I have to admit, I kind of miss. I'm no longer there, but when I was with the Tribeca Film Institute, I was actually also able to fund projects and put them through a lab in addition to exhibiting them, and that was really nice because it sort of felt like, year round there was support that I could offer with my team to the filmmakers and artists. And that felt really exciting, but unfortunately some of that work isn't happening anymore. I think for me, one of the things, I live in South Africa. I don't actually even live in New York anymore. And in some ways that's been really helpful because I think I look a little bit outside of the usual places for work for artists. We've never relied just on submissions, because one of the things about relying on submissions is that there are certain people who may not feel like they are in a place to apply, and they would automatically disqualify themselves by not applying. So I think one of the things that Lauren and I both try to do is make sure that we're going, doing studio visits and going to film festivals and VR festivals and weird art festivals and trying to find work wherever we may find it, and be as open as possible to work coming from unexpected places. And I think I try and do that more actually now than I used to, because now I sort of live in, I guess, a bit of an unexpected place, and I am seeing more work that wouldn't necessarily be applying to, for example, Tribeca. And so that for me is really exciting, because I think it is making me a better curator. I hope it is. Because I just think it's sort of opened my eyes a little bit to the way I used to work and the way that I'm now working, which I think is a little bit more global. And that's been really exciting. But I think not relying only on submissions has been an important lesson for me to learn, because I do think that there are a lot of people who are doing really amazing work who might not feel like their work belongs at Tribeca. And so to try and sort of open the doors wider and say, you do belong, has been really exciting. And I think, that's another thing that is, I think, a little bit unique about the VR space now, is all of us are film festivals. Well, actually, South by is a little bit different. But, most of us work at film festivals, and we have this sort of film legacy. But actually, the artists who are coming into the VR space are not all filmmakers. Some of them are fine artists, some of them are theater people, some of them are designers, some of them are game makers. So that's the other thing, is also kind of trying to make it very clear that we all meet in VR, and that all of that work might find a place at a film festival. And I think there is still a little bit of education to do around that for all of us. I think as curators, but also as artists, because it is different. In the old days, it was really clear if you wanted to find filmmakers, you kind of go through the film routes. But now there isn't really a direct VR route. So many disciplines are meeting in VR, which I think is really exciting, but it does make the job a little bit harder sometimes.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts about the immersive community at large is the diversity from people from so many different backgrounds that have come together to kind of help build this new, unique community.
In Venice, we have a very deeply committed strategy to try and help incubate and discover projects through three ways. The first way is the Venice Biennale College for cinema and for VR, where we developed 18 VR projects every year. 6 come from Italy. We're starting the first college VR workshop specifically for Italian VR makers next week. And then we select 12 projects that come for a week-long residency to Venice to develop them, a little bit like the Sundance Lab. Out of those, we select 3 that are fully financed and produced by ourselves. The second thing we do is, on the financing side, we select 12 VR projects that are seeking their financing. they're invited to the Venice Film Festival during Venice VR. And we also invite around 80 professionals from all over the world that can invest one way or another into those projects and facilitate the meetings between the makers, producers, and those potential investors. And then the third way we try and nurture VR is through Venice VR by showcasing. Ideally, in a perfect world, I would love it if we could add a fourth element, which is sort of contradictory to the nature of a festival. But I think what would be great would be if we could find a way that festivals would actually partner with organizations so that the films that premiere at our facilities could stay, or at least some of them could stay for a number of weeks or maybe months, and so that the work that is done in bringing light on these projects during the few days that the festival lasts could impact on these pieces by triggering interest on a public so that they could still come, maybe on a more commercial basis then, and then people would have to pay to see these pieces. But I think it would be amazing if we, the festivals could try and collaborate with LBE companies, facilities, organizations, so that the work that is done on the festival, because festivals cost a lot of money for a short amount of time, with a lot of pressure and a lot of opportunities for exposure on these projects, but then it stops. And then and you hope that during the festival, those pieces will have met distributors, salespeople, so that they can then go to places where they can make money by being sold to people who can see them. And sometimes I feel like all this effort, all this work that we do in festivals could be capitalized in a way for the benefit of the pieces themselves, so that they could go on to attracting, an audience where we have set them up. That would be my dream.
We gave that a shot in 2013 with it was called the Utah Modern Art. No, it was the Salt Lake City Art Center, and it was before the LBE. I think it's a good distinction between what LBEs are prepared and the familiarity of the language and the tempo of the work, as opposed to the art world, which tends to require way longer lead times and very different ways of working. So I think, when we did the show at the Art Center, it was a beautiful show, but it was very difficult logistically to make happen. But now that this field is growing, I think that the opportunity is coming up again, that it's something to actually consider and explore,
Yeah, this is a little bit what the Phi Center, for instance, in Montreal, is gearing up to be, which is also a very interesting model, I think. And I think there's a lot to be discussed and explored in this way, trying to see how we can all stimulate the building of a true market. I think it's not too early now to start really thinking how are the best ways for the works to make their income.
Yeah, I have to say, that is something that we're also thinking about deeply. And it's funny that the Phi Center comes up, because every time I have this conversation with anyone, they're like, well, there's the Phi Center. And it is like this unicorn one. I mean, it's an amazing, amazing space, but it's in Montreal and there's only one of them right now. And I sort of feel like if we could figure out a way to, it would be wonderful to have more Phi Centers, but a way for there to be more places where this work can go, and maybe a clearer path to get the work into those spaces. Because it does, a thing that really does break my heart, I think we were talking about this yesterday, is I want people to see the work. And the reality of a film festival, or I think any kind of limited festival, is that a lot of people who want to see the work are not going to be able to. There are only so many headsets and so many slots. And these days, there are more people who want to see the work than there are available headsets and slots. And that is really, to me, that's like heartbreaking. So I really would love there to be more of an avenue for what happens after a festival. And I think right now we're starting to see the edges of what that might be, but we're not quite there yet. So either we need more FI centers or we need to kind of figure out better partnerships with LBEs and with museums and libraries. I mean, there's lots of cultural spaces where this work could go. It doesn't necessarily just have to be established LBEs. But I think we need to do that.
Well, it's organically, yeah. You know, with the cute art, the art world, there's more VR. That's actually, there's a big upswing now in the embrace of VR in the art world. I guess it's just like something that's organically developing on its own. I mean, it would be interesting for festivals to jump into it, but it's also very interesting to see it kind of bubble up on its own and diversify in different ways.
The only thing about some of the art world VR is often I'm noticing that those spaces aren't necessarily open to work that I think would fit there, but isn't necessarily acute art or coming out of those, and it's not necessarily made by world famous artists. And I think that's a little bit of a shame because there's all this work that would fit. But I think that's the problem with silos, is we're still a little bit like there's the art world and there's the film world, and there's not necessarily. I mean, there's some people who I think move between those worlds, but not everyone does.
I think one of the ways I would like to approach this is thinking that what festivals can bring to the table of optimizing distribution is thinking of themselves as brands. And not only just as limited events during a limited amount of time. And by partnering with distributors or commercial entities or LBEs, there may be ways. I mean, I'm not saying it's the solution, it's just there needs to be, I think, a brainstorm around this where what a festival really brings to a piece, when the piece is invited by the festival, it brings legitimacy, it brings a shine because it's associated with a very prestigious brand like, the festivals that I think we represent. And that association with a brand that says this is a good piece, I'm making it super simple, I think we can probably push that logic further to try and explore a new distribution model.
Well, one of the things that I know that we've done, and it's been coming up more and more, at least in conversation, is for events, larger events such as ours, to be able to partner with some smaller events. I know we've partnered with one in Greece for a couple years where we've been able to help the projects that we have kind of started do another smaller showcase, like you said, around the brand name. So a South by Southwest showcase within another smaller event in another part of the world where we've been able to actually showcase this work to a different group, sect of audience that wouldn't have ever been able to come over to see it at my event, And that has been fun and interesting to kind of see that start to spark and develop a little bit more.
There is a role, and I love that we're all up here, that the world has grown this large, that, we have all specific roles, because at Sundance, there is something to be said for protecting the incubation space. Because we're showing so many prototypes, brand new, wet experimentation. It's very different from what Venice and what you do, showing more finished works, polished, ready for the. We show that too, but I think for New Frontier, the role that we have played and probably will continue to play is a place of taking risks and experimentation, which is not necessarily compatible with the marketplace and distribution.
I want to add to what you're saying, that the fact that when we select for Venice, like where we are now with Liz, I would say that almost 100% of the pieces that we are watching, and among which we need to select the 30 or so that will be in competition, none of them are finished. Most of them are work in progress, and sometimes so much work in progress that there's hardly anything to watch and to select from. And I think we're all in the same situation. So when we talk about incubating, the selection process for a VR festival is a work of love, but also
Faith.
of trust
Faith,
and
trust.
faith in the talent and in the promise that the makers are offering us. So the incubation process is almost an intrinsic part of the work we do. We never see the finished piece before we select it.
I mean, I think just to add to that, I mean, and I totally agree, and I think it's really amazing that there are these spaces. I mean, I think you excel at that, and so does Doc Lab, at creating a space for pieces that are not necessarily fully polished, but they need audience feedback, and they need to be in a public environment. And it doesn't work for everything, but I think it's really vital to, like you say, have those spaces and protect them. But I think the other side of all of this is also just the cost for the filmmakers and the artists to be in these spaces, because depending on how the festivals are set up and what part of the world they're in, it can be very, very expensive for artists to take their work, especially if they're building these crazy installations. And obviously, if you're part of a sort of a bigger company where you've got that kind of support behind you, that's one thing. But if you're an independent artist and you're having to travel yourself to a festival, bring your own gear sometimes, put yourself up. This is different from festival to festival, but there's always some costs involved. And I think, that's part of the reason why I guess I think it's so important that we are thinking about how this then connects to the market that is emerging, or some kind of support beyond the festivals, because it is a huge risk that the filmmakers take on, and I think it's a much bigger risk than the festivals take on, frankly. And so that's just something that I think about and I worry about, and I think festivals play such a vital role. It's not that I don't think we should be doing it, but the filmmakers are also taking on a lot of financial risk, and sometimes it's impossible for them to tour, and so that's just something in terms of the sort of financial well-being of artists and filmmakers, and then also just how that work will then connect to audiences. I think it's just something we sort of have to bear in mind.
Definitely, and while you're talking about that, I'm keep thinking about the Collider. Remember the Collider in Tribeca? Actually, the first time I see Collider was in IDFA last year, and I saw that reiterate in Tribeca, and I'm thinking about the possibility of localizing it and moving it here, and trying to get all the props locally and all the facilitating locally in a way to make it work. And it took so long, and I know, and the end is because there's only 2 people can experience this at one time slot for 40 minutes. That means one day we can have probably 10, 12 people to see that, and I cannot imagine after 4 days it's going to be breakdown. And I talked to the director of the piece, and she would say, "Oh, it sleeps." At the very end. This is actually what we just discussed is about what we have to do within Film Festival and what we can do outside Film Festival, and we already talked about that. And we do have this, because I'm always interested about the theme. We come together as a VR Trinity. You mentioned the last edition of Venice. Like people can take a selfie, or on that, like the VR Trinity took here certificate of that. And I also feel every time I go to film festivals, it's like people, they're always the first time comer, and even though we've been here for many years, we still need to do the same thing from the very start and teach people to help them access to this new space. So yes, I think we can have some time.
There's also another part of this too. I mean, there's the work itself, but then there's also the world that's growing, and how the technology can be found at a festival, taken by a studio like Disney, and they develop it and find new ways of making movies, like The Lion King was made inside of VR. So that's it's another facet of the world that is not so much that's different than points of access. It's the influence and creating these points of access for people that will take the technology in other ways, grow the world, and will eventually come back to the festival in another form, raising the bar in different ways.
And also that reminds me about this art form is so much connected to the development of the technology, like Match Leap and the Quest. And when I was imagining like because we can set a safe zone in Quest. When we go outside the safe zone, it's become a camera. I think that could be so magic in the multi-reality storytelling, and that so many potentials to open up for creators for this.
I think we need to be aware of the fact that where we stand now, being able to experience pieces like the Collider for 40 minutes, 2 people with people around us servicing the piece, makes me feel it's the age of like haute couture of VR, because in a few years from now, when we will have to scale, when we will have to make the pieces viable on the market, probably we will not have that kind of experience anymore, and we will think back on those days when we were like Alice, a couple years ago, where you have performers around you for one spectator at a time. That's very highly privileged thing, to have a show done for you, one person at a time with reactive performers around you. I don't know, and everyone who's working now on reactive performers pieces, they're looking at how can this scale. An example of this was the horribly virtual reality last year, where it was able to be scaled up to 12 people. And it was the same people who did Alice for just one person at a time. So when I watch a beautiful piece like Collider, for instance, I try and savor it as much as possible, because I know that it will not happen forever.
I don't think that's necessarily true, though. Like, one of the things that so not everything has to scale, and I think this is one of the things that that's kind of calmed me down recently, is because I've always been thinking about the work I do at Tribeca, but also elsewhere, as like, is it going to scale? Where can this go? Can it go to enough places? Is it going to be in everyone's home? But actually, when I started to think about different models, so less the Netflix model and more the museum model or the gallery model, or there's only one Mona Lisa, and it doesn't need to scale. I mean, obviously it's been reproduced ad infinitum, but people still want to see the original and take selfies with it. And so I hope that there will always be a place for pieces like Collider, and I actually hope that we are that place and will continue to be that place, because the amazing thing about film festivals is they are kind of extraordinary beings. Like, they don't have to take pieces that are going to scale. They don't have to exist within the marketplace. They can exist half in the marketplace and half in this other weird world of art and the gift economy. And I think that's kind of amazing, that we can still do pieces for one if we want to. And those pieces don't necessarily have to go all around the world, that you can have these sort of unique experiences. And I think for me, that's actually one of the magical things about film festivals. And I hope that will never go away.
I'll argue with you later about this. But
my favorite thing similar to that is that we have been given the freedom to show the type of work that we want to, and it has helped develop kind of the flavor and the taste of each of our individual events, so that each one of us kind of has a different take on the medium and can showcase that in different ways, and it's been fun to watch, and that evolves from year to year even, and that's great also.
There's also this notion of who the audience is. I mean, in my mind, the project of New Frontier, I'm really hoping that the industry will develop such that a lot of the works that are camera ready for their close-up can go and find their audiences. But primarily, the audience, in my mind, at Sundance are the filmmakers and the people who are interested in developing the technology. So in a certain sense, the audience is actually quite specific. And I think about it as a kind of laboratory more than, I'm also very interested in the public coming in as well. But that is also a part of what we're doing at New Frontier. And that's part of the incubation project as well, is to bring filmmakers, very seasoned, mature storytellers to come and look at these new ways of telling stories, new ways of thinking about the architecture of film festivals, and coming up with new ways of, new projects, new things that we can consider for future festivals. And who knows what kind of impact that might have on the industry, like The Lion King being done in VR. Yeah.
So we do have some time for questions, if there is any. Questions. I'll give it to you.
Yeah, I come over. So my question is, myself come from the cinema background. I'm a producer and a screenwriter for the feature film. So my question is, when you select a work as a part of a festival, this VR project, whether it's interactive or non-interactive, do you think about it, how that related to the traditional cinema or the feature film? That's not in your consideration for choosing this new medium project into your film festival? And what's the criteria and bias when you choose the VR project for the film festival? So basically, I try to find out the bridge between the feature film, traditional cinema, and the new medium of this VR project and the VR film. Yeah, so that's my question. Thank you.
It's a really good question, because I go to as many immersive festivals as I go to like tech conferences, to biennials, and there's so much exciting work, things that I connect to, amazing ideas where it sends my head. But I always have to ask myself, is this going to be translatable to a film audience? So I'm really looking for works that are speaking a kind of cinematic language, because my audience has to be able to leave, the latest Todd Solondz film, go straight into New Frontier, and also still understand the language. So it is very specific in that way, the kind of language that these works need to speak and to find legibility within Sundance.
I would add that the element of interactivity is absolutely key and will become more and more very specific to VR. At Venice, we have 2 awards aside from the main award. One is for Best Experience, which is for interactive content, and one is Best Story for linear content. We consider, and I completely agree with Sherry, that in a film festival, most of our audience is people who are used to see films. But that being said, we try to look at work that really explores the notion of interactivity. I think it's a key element, and it's one for which we don't have a grammar yet that is usable the same way that critics have been analyzing films. In Venice this year, we're going to try and hold a sort of a symposium on VR analysis, and how do you review, how do you evaluate, how do you criticize a VR piece? How do you build the methodology on analyzing a piece beyond I like it, I don't like it? And how do you start building the grammar and the vocabulary for someone to review fully a VR piece? We think that it's time to think about this, and I think your question relates exactly to this. How do you take into account the spatial dimension of a VR piece, which is very new, very specific to VR, while film is analyzed through the prism of time, mostly, in terms of dramatic structure. These elements are very new and they need to be addressed, and I think it's time to start thinking about this. And certainly in the selection process, we do look at the elements of interactivity as a major aspect of the specificity of a piece.
Yeah, I mean, I have the same issue around sort of like how do you actually create a criteria around the selection process. I think it's easier for 360 films or linear pieces because a lot of the terminology is very similar to traditional film. But with interactivity, the interactions themselves become the story, and actually being able to kind of describe that and adjudicate that is quite difficult. And I mean, one example would be the collider. So I think Lauren and I both, when we're making selections for Tribeca, we are, I think similar to what Chari was saying, we are a film festival, and as much as we are excited about all these worlds meeting in VR, we're still trying to find pieces that are story-driven and that speak to a wider sort of film festival world, I guess. And for me, the Collider absolutely is that, but it is a very different kind of piece to something like Common Ground, for example, which is a room-scale interactive documentary, but it's clearly a documentary. And so I guess, sometimes it's kind of like you'll know it when you see it kind of thing, but it's not good enough when you're trying to create criteria. But that's kind of how I guess I do it as a curator, is sometimes there's just pieces that I respond to, and I think that there's a story there, and it's very hard to describe exactly how it works, like something like the Collider. I mean, you could talk about power relationships, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, it absolutely belongs in storyscapes. And so I would love to know what those criteria are when you come up with them, because it's something I really struggle with. And I think it's also, I have to say, it's something I struggle with, but it's something I've always loved about interactive and immersive media generally, not just VR, is that the interactions actually become the experience and they become the story, and that to me is incredible. And that's going back to like online projects like Gaza Zarot, with the line down the middle. I think that interaction as the story is what makes this work so exciting for me sometimes.
And I'll say that one of the things we always ask ourselves is, does this story benefit from being in virtual reality or augmented reality? Like, does the story, can it translate in a way that elevates it to another level whenever we're watching it fully immersed? And is the whole story taking place right here? Does it need to be told around me? Because we really are evaluating every level of the story whenever we're looking around. I'll watch a piece 2 or 3 times sometimes just to make sure that I'm seeing what the story is really trying to tell me. So that's one of the biggest questions we ask ourselves, definitely, whenever we're reviewing and thinking about it in terms of story and in terms of this kind of cross-section between film and VR.
Okay, and because we're running out of time now, I'm going to wrap it up because I do remember that every film festival of us have a VR theater or VR cinema session. It's a space kept for, or like a small area for VR to experience, for like a connection that we inherited from film, and try to make the connection with film. So, and it's also the same for Sandbox. And for this year, beside the VR theater, VR cinema, we have a AK VR theater cinema that use different devices, trying to bring new and more immersive resolution to the audience in the way also a tribute to the traditional film art. So thank you so much for sharing, and let's keep on our festival. Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.